Now, we have a viewer from Minneapolis who wants to talk about public housing and
Mm.
housing costs. This viewer specifically asks when the state is going to get involved in fixing up public housing. But I think the question is probably, we should try to answer that viewer's question, but I think it's more broad than just that. There are housing issues generally. Let's start with you, Representative Nash. Housing questions, public housing.
Yeah,
What's your view on where that might go this session?
thank you. And this is the question I was hoping somebody would ask. I have
Well,
for
there
many,
you
many
go.
years. Yeah,
We aim to
it's
please.
my dream come true. So for many,
Yes.
many years here at the Capitol, I have worked on the notion of housing affordability. And I now serve on the Commission for Housing Affordability. Senator Housley's there, and this year and last year I'm co-chair with Senator Dietzick. I hope she's able to find the time to stick with it because I know she's passionate about this. Here's the thing: the 6 kids that I've mentioned, uh, they may or may not be able to afford a home in the state of Minnesota when they choose to come back, if they choose to come back. And my wife and I are certainly hoping that not right now, but one day there will be grandkids. Take your time, kids. But we have a housing crisis on multiple levels. It is in how quickly are we building, or in what quantity are we building starter homes? But it's also in how are we providing affordable housing for people who want to live or need to live in an apartment to have that secure housing for themselves. Um, I say this regularly. A stable home builds stable communities, stable families, increases the opportunity for children to succeed educationally and as people. Housing is fundamental to the success of our future. Uh, it comes in a lot of different formats, and Representative Long may or may not roll his eyes when I break out my tried and true equation analogy. I made it through algebra and I actually kind of liked it. But if you remember quadratic equations, there's a lot of stuff above the line, there's a lot of stuff below the line, and you have to solve each piece. Those integers above the line, some of them are apartments, some of them are low income housing, workforce housing, starter homes, and how do you move people progressionally through each of those stops along the way? I think as it relates to the question of your caller, though, um, I'm very concerned talking to some of the people that I have talked to in the housing provider industry that the what is going to happen as a result of potential statewide rent control. I believe there's a bill out there for that, but certainly in St. Paul there has been rent control. And go back to the question we just talked about. If you elevate one form of a cost or another, it's going to have a dramatic impact. But we have people who need housing and they need it now. I know we have a large number of homeless, and that breaks all 4 of the hearts of the legislators here. And yes, folks watching, legislators have hearts. Um, but we have to fix this. And it's not simply fixing one end of the spectrum, it's solving each part of that equation. And it is apartments, it is twin homes, it is in zoning, it is in inspection fees, it is in a number of things. And we can't just simply say, "Oh, I fixed the number of apartments in pick a city," and then dust off your hands and say, "Oh, I got it solved." It's not that easy. It's very, very difficult. And I hope once again that we can, as legislators in both parties, in both chambers, roll up our sleeves and figure it out because it's vital.
Senator Murphy, your thoughts, housing issues.
So crisis is right on many levels. Uh, it will take some money, which we have. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, and this morning in our finance committee, we had the debate about whether or not to include again inflation in the state's budgeting forecast, which I think is an important measure. It's eliminating a gimmick that's been in the budget for far too long. But we know that we have a surplus. It's a lot of one-time money. One-time money can build a lot of housing. So I think that should and will be a real priority for the people of Minnesota and for this legislature, both sides of the aisle. Representative Nash, I love what you have to say about that. I had a conversation with my colleague, Senator Port, just yesterday. She is the chair of the Housing Committee in the Minnesota Senate, and she is focusing on kids, which I think is right. You know, we've done a lot of good work to make sure that veterans are no longer experiencing homelessness, and we've made real progress there. I like that she's thinking about kids, especially in the relationship to young people and their education and their well-being. But I understand and appreciate that this is a statewide problem, and we do need creative and multiple level solutions in order to solve it.
Representative Long, your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I agree with a lot of what's been said, but what I'll add is I do think this will be a bipartisan priority this year. And I have good reason to believe that because Leader Demuth, when asked our very first press conference what 2 areas we might be able to work together on with Republicans and Democrats, said early childhood, which we've already talked about, and housing. So I think that this will be an area where there's a lot of interest in working together. We know there's affordable housing issues all across the state, and this doesn't affect just one community. And I also agree that there are many, many avenues that we need to pursue and many types of affordable housing that we need to develop. To respond to the questioners asked specifically about public housing needs, we have a huge backlog in public housing maintenance. And we really do need to help our public housing providers in improving the quality of housing and dealing with some of the unsafe conditions that we know exist in our public housing in the state. We also need to make sure that we have more affordable rent. And right now in Minnesota, 500,000 Minnesotans in every given month are at risk of losing their housing because their rent is unaffordable. And the definition there is you're paying more than 30% of your income in rent, which is just crazy to think about a family trying to get by with 1/3 of their income going to their housing. And so we have 500,000 people every single day who are in that situation and struggling. So there's been a proposal that was in our top bill introductions in both the House and Senate called Bring It Home, which would help individuals with some rental assistance. There's a federal rental assistance program right now that is woefully inadequate. It has 15 to 20 year waiting lines for individuals to get rental assistance. So having a state program would go a really long way. In addition to building new affordable housing, we could help people get into housing that is available at a rate that they could afford.
Senator Housley?
Thank you, Barry. Look at how well we get along. See? Same priorities. I sat on the Housing Committee the last session, and I am on Senator Port's Housing and Homeless Committee this session, and we actually are doing a housing tour tomorrow. I agree with everybody. We're actually one of the worst states in the country when it comes to affordable housing. And being on the other side of it in real estate for the last 20 some years, you can get a starter home in the surrounding states to Minnesota for a lot less than you can here in Minnesota. So it breaks my heart when I have to bring somebody over to Hudson, Wisconsin, so they can buy their first home there because they can't afford it here. Like it can be $10,000 to $20,000 more, but that's actually the difference in getting their 30-year mortgage, being able to make that payment. And we toured a lot in the last session to the developers and what the causes were, why it was so much more expensive here. And a lot of it does come down to regulations. And I hope that is something that can get addressed because we are in a crisis. There's so many crises that we're in, but this is our long-term caregivers, our child care, our schools, and housing. There's so many, but this, like we've all said, it is a priority for us, and we do have to do something to make it better for everybody in this.